Hello everyone, and welcome to today's Sutta class. We will start with the Namo Tassa as usual. Feel free to join if you like. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. So, welcome everyone to today's Sutta class. Today we are reading a sutta from the Anguttara Nikaya. This sutta is called In Brief, or in Pali it's called Samhitta Sutta, and there are so many suttas, of course, that are called In Brief or Samhitta Sutta. So this is one of those very many, and this is Anguttara Nikaya 8.63. So in this sutta talks about the development of deep samadhi, and then obviously from that the development of the higher attainments on the path, such as arahantship. And this is very interesting because it shows different pathways into samadhi. And for those of you who have listened to a few talks, maybe you remember a few weeks ago, we read the Atthakkanagara Sutta from the Majjhima Nikaya, which is also known as the sutta about the 11 doors to the Deathless. So this is a sutta that describes 11 methods how to attain arahantship, or how to develop deep samadhi and then attain arahantship. And so in this sutta about the 11 doors, it talked about 11 methods, the 4 Brahma Viharas, the 4 jhanas, and then the first 3 of the 4 immaterial attainments. So altogether 11, and that sutta sort of said that you should develop any of these 11, and any of these can be the door that you can walk through, so the breakthrough to arahantship, and to the higher knowledges, and then to arahantship. So in that sutta about the 11 doors, the Buddha recommended that you just practice one of these methods, and any of these methods would be enough to attain full liberation. But here in this sutta today, is a little different, because in this sutta today, the Buddha is talking to a monk, and he recommends to that monk that he practices a lot of different meditation methods. So the approach is quite different here. And so I thought it would be interesting to read this and then to compare a little bit and to see what is going on here. So without further ado, I think we can start with the sutta. I have put a link in the live chat. The link is to Bhante Suchatra's translation. And I will be reading from Bhikkhu Bodhi's translation. So the sutta begins. Then a certain bhikkhu approached the Blessed One, paid homage to him, sat down to one side, and said to him, Bhante, it would be good if the Blessed One would teach me the Dhamma in brief, so that, having heard the Dhamma from the Blessed One, I might dwell alone, withdrawn, heedful, ardent, and resolute. So this is obviously a standard introduction to a sutta. There is a monk, and we don't even know the name of the monk, so it seems that it wasn't one of the famous monks, it was just any monk. And that monk, it seems, wants to go and practice in seclusion, and he's asking the Buddha for a topic or for some instructions for his meditation, because once he has gone into seclusion, obviously, he expects that will take a while to develop the path, so that can take months, that can take years. So he will be separated from the Sangha. He will not have access to teachings anymore. So he's asking the Buddha for a brief introduction or for a brief summary of a teaching that is specifically tailored to his particular situation that he can use to really develop his practice. And from many other suttas, we know that many monks and nuns went to the Buddha and made exactly this request of the Buddha. And then depending on that person's particular faculties and that person's particular mental setup, the Buddha would give different teachings to different people. And so here, This is a very typical case. A monk wants to go practice in seclusion and is now asking the Buddha. But the Buddha answers him the following: "It is just in this way that some hollow men here make requests of me, but when the Dhamma has been explained, they think only of following me around." So the Buddha actually doesn't give him a teaching. He's unwilling to give a teaching. Instead, he criticizes him and he calls him a hollow man, or he compares him to hollow men. And he says, well, it happens all the time that random people come and make this request and they actually tell me they want to go into seclusion. But when I have taught them, then they don't actually go and practice. They just hang out with me and they just wander around with me and they keep on socializing and they don't actually sit down and do the practice. So it's a total waste of time for me to teach such people. And so for that reason, I'm unwilling to give you a teaching also. So the Buddha isn't very encouraging to this poor monk, and sort of makes it very clear that he is unwilling to just give teachings if people aren't serious and if people don't really want to practice. But now the monk insists, and the monk says, "Bhante, let the Blessed One teach me the Dhamma in brief. Let the Fortunate One teach me the Dhamma in brief. Perhaps I might come to understand the meaning of the Blessed One's statement. Perhaps I might become an heir to the Blessed One's statement." Sorry, an heir of the Blessed One's statement. So the monk is not discouraged, even though the Buddha didn't comply with his request, and even though the Buddha was quite harsh with him. So the monk just keeps on repeating his request, and he states that he's really, really serious and he really wants to practice. And so now he's trying to convince the Buddha that he is not one of those hollow men that bother him but then never practice and just follow him around. But he's actually someone who's very serious. And I think the reason why the Buddha did this and the reason why the Buddha first refused to teach is so that the monk really reflects what is his purpose, and so that he can really sort of have a very strong resolution and sort of strengthen his intention to actually go into seclusion. So maybe that monk wasn't quite serious in the beginning, or he was a bit wavering whether he could make it or not. Or sometimes it can seem quite daunting to go alone into a very lonely place, and you are not going to see other people, and it seems very, very daunting. It seems very difficult. So you need to have a very, very clear intention and very clear purpose of why you're doing this. And maybe the Buddha, by refusing him the first time, was trying to make that monk reflect on why he's doing this and to really strengthen this intention of his, and just to make the monk sort of be a little bit more clear in his head. And then since he made the request another time, now he's really strongly set on going into seclusion. And so it can be actually quite helpful as a preparation for a teaching to just have your intention very clear. And also the monk now, he says he really wants to try and understand the meaning of the Buddha, and he also wants to become an heir to the Buddha's statement. And so this idea of becoming an heir to the Buddha's Dhamma, this is obviously something that is used in the suttas quite frequently, and usually becoming an heir to the Buddha's Dhamma. That means really developing the higher stages on the path. Very often that is used to refer to arahants. So arahants have become heirs to the Buddha's teaching. Sometimes it's also more broadly applied to any kind of people who have attained a noble attainment. So the noble people, anybody from stream entry upwards. But definitely you must have made the breakthrough to stream entry in order to be considered an heir to the Buddha's teaching. So now here the monk very clearly states that he has the intention to develop the higher stages on the path. And he's hoping and he's aspiring to that. So now, of course, since his intention is very pure and very clear, now the Buddha sort of consents and agrees to teach him. And the Buddha now says, "In that case, Bhikkhu, you should train yourself thus. My mind will be firm and well settled internally. Arisen, bad, unwholesome states will not obsess my mind. Thus should you train yourself." So this is the first instruction that the Buddha gives to this monk who wants to go into seclusion. The first thing you need to do is to make your mind very firm, very well settled, so to develop some kind of samadhi or some kind of mental calm. And of course, the Buddha also says, arisen, bad, unwholesome states will not obsess my mind. So the first training is to overcome the hindrances. So bad, unwholesome states obviously refers to the 5 hindrances. And so this is the first thing that you need to overcome, these very gross defilements in the mind that will keep you from actually developing your mind in the proper direction, and that will keep you from actually entering any kind of samadhi stage. So the Buddha says this is the first training that you must do. And then the Buddha continues, and he says, when, bhikkhu, your mind is firm and well settled internally, and arisen bad, unwholesome states do not obsess your mind, then you should train yourself thus. I will develop and cultivate the liberation of mind by loving kindness. Make it a vehicle and basis, carry it out, consolidate it, and properly undertake it. Thus should you train yourself. When this concentration, so this concentration through this loving kindness or metta practice, when this concentration has been developed and cultivated by you in this way, then you should develop this concentration with thought and examination. You should develop it without thought, but with examination only. You should develop it without thought and examination. You should develop it with rapture. You should develop it without rapture. You should develop it accompanied by comfort, and you should develop it accompanied by equanimity. So now that this bhikkhu has overcome the 5 hindrances, the Buddha says, well, after you have overcome the 5 hindrances, well, usually we would expect the Buddha now to teach about jhana, because in the usual progress in the suttas, it's always overcome the 5 hindrances, then practice the 4 jhanas. But here, there is an intermediate step. And so the Buddha says, once your mind is fairly pure and clear, because you've overcome the 5 hindrances, so as the Buddha says here, your mind is firm and well settled internally, then you train yourself in metta practice, in the practice of loving kindness. And you develop this to a pretty high degree. So it's not just you sit there and you think, may all beings be happy 3 times and that's it, but you actually like develop it to almost to its completion, basically. So the Buddha says it, you make it a vehicle. So the Buddha says you cultivate the liberation of the mind by loving kindness. So not just like a beginning step or an intermediate stage, really you liberate your entire mind through loving kindness. That means your entire mind is open, your entire mind is spacious, just filled with metta. Your heart has opened up. There are no more barriers in your heart. And all these preliminary stages of metta where we make a distinction and we direct metta to ourselves or to others, to our friends, to neutral people, to enemies, the way like metta is usually taught with all these sort of categories of people and where we make distinctions between people. So all this has fallen away. The mind is completely open and it's just full of metta, and all these barriers and all these categories between people or between beings have all completely fallen away. The mind is just open and spacious and filled with metta, just basically in all directions, without any kind of barriers and without any kind of distinction. So that is what is meant with liberation of the mind through loving kindness. And so the Buddha says you make this, you make a basis in this. So you really firmly stand in this, like you really, really master this technique. It's not just like you practice this from time to time, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but you really know what you're doing, and you've carried out, you've consolidated it. So again, consolidating means you really know what you're doing, and you're really quite capable in doing this. So this is the first training. And then when you have trained in this way, and when you have developed metta to such a high degree, then the Buddha says, based on this concentration that you have practiced through this metta practice, now you develop concentration, or you develop samadhi in various ways. So as the Buddha says here, with thought and examination, or only examination, or without both thought and examination, and then with rapture and pleasure and equanimity and so on. So for those of you who have been around on this channel for a while and have heard these kind of teachings for a while, or who have read the suttas a little bit, you will recognize that the Buddha here is talking about developing the 4 jhanas. But he just, without using the word jhana as such, without like specifically saying these are the 4 jhanas, but he's exactly talking about the jhana factors in the exact order of how you would progress through the jhanas. So this is exactly what the Buddha references here. But now the Buddha says, now based on the metta practice that you have done, you develop the 4 jhanas. And so I think most of you will be familiar with the jhana factors. And you will know that in the beginning, in the first jhana, there's still various things going on in the mind. There can still be vitakka and vichara, here translated as thought and examination. And there are still pleasurable feelings, and there are still rapture and all these kind of things that are still going on. And as you progressively go deeper into the jhana states, all these factors gradually fall away. And so your mind becomes more and more calm and more equanimous, until you reach the 4th jhana, where the mind is entirely equanimous. And so what is happening here is the Buddha says, first of all, you practice the samadhi state with thought and examination, so both with vitakka and vichara. So this is obviously the first jhana, where we have both of these things. And then, of course, we also have rapture and pleasure, or here called rapture and comfort. This is piti and sukha in Pali. And then, of course, unification of mind, which is the concentration. And then as we go a little bit deeper into the jhana, the first thing that will fall away is vitakka, or here called thought. So at that point, we are practicing concentration without thought, but with examination only. And this is kind of an intermediate stage between the first jhana and the second jhana. And for those of you who are familiar with the jhanas as they are described in the sutta, you will know that in the first jhana, you can have vitakka and vichara, so thought and examination, or just examination. And both of this still refers to the first jhana. And once you enter second jhana, both thought and examination have been overcome, or have been let go, or have been abandoned. If we talk about the Abhidhamma framework of jhanas, we actually have 5 jhanas there. And the reason why there are 5 jhanas in the Abhidhamma framework is that this first jhana has been split into 2 parts. And the first jhana in the Abhidhamma framework is the one that has vitakka and vichara, so thought and examination. The second one has only examination. And then from the third jhana onwards, there is no more thought and examination. So for that reason, there's one additional jhana in the Abhidhamma framework, because this can be an intermediate stage where one has already gone and the other one is still there. But if we keep on talking about the sutta framework, then this is an intermediate stage between the first and the second jhana. And then as we enter the second jhana, both thought and examination, so vitakka and vichara, have ceased. But rapture and pleasure, or rapture and comfort, so piti and sukha, are both still there. And these are pleasurable experiences. Piti is the mental experience, so mental pleasurable feelings or pleasurable states. And sukha is bodily comfort, so the body feels very comfortable and very nice. So in the second jhana, we still have both of these stages, or both of these states, piti and sukha. And then as we go deeper into jhana, piti also falls away. So the mental pleasurable states will be replaced with equanimity, while bodily sukha, so bodily pleasurable states, are still there. So the mind has already calmed down, like the mental pleasure is already gone, replaced with equanimity, but on the body level, the body still feels very nice, very agreeable. So this is the third jhana. And then as we progress from the third to the fourth jhana, also the nice feeling in the body, so sukha, falls away and is replaced with neutral feeling. So, and then in the fourth jhana, the mind is completely equanimous and the body feels completely neutral. So there is no more actual there are no more actual pleasurable states in the fourth jhana. But the fourth jhana is so calm and so quiet that that calmness in and of itself, that stillness in and of itself, is of course a very happy state, even though we don't feel happiness anymore at this point. So at this point, the mind is entirely clear, entirely pure, entirely equanimous, and entirely still. And so for that reason, at this point, it's quite easy for wisdom to see our defilements, to see what is going on, and to see all our attachments, and then to let go of these attachments, because the mind is so still and so clear and so pure. And in the stages before, the mind still has a little bit of agitation because of the pleasure that's going on, or even because of thought and examination that might still be going on. So your wisdom faculty needs to be comparatively much stronger in order to actually see what's going on. And some people have strong wisdom faculties and they can make progress based on the earlier jhanas. Some people's wisdom faculty isn't that well developed, so they need to go a lot deeper into samadhi to see what is going on and to actually see the attachment and let go. So it really depends on people's faculties, how deep they need to go. But here in this particular case, where the Buddha is teaching this particular monk, specifically giving a teaching specifically tailored to this particular monk, the Buddha recommends to him obviously to go all the way up to the fourth jhana. And so this is what the Buddha recommends that this monk starts doing once he has gone into seclusion. So overcome the hindrances, practice metta to a very high degree, and then practice and develop all of the four jhanas. And so usually we would now expect that after he has practiced the four jhanas and has arrived at the fourth jhana, we would now expect the Buddha to teach him about developing the wisdom faculty, about seeing the attachment, about letting go, and then about attaining arahantship. But this is not what happens. Instead, the Buddha starts teaching him another meditation method. And the Buddha says, when bhikkhu, this concentration has been developed and well developed by you in this way, then you should train yourself thus. I will develop and cultivate the liberation of mind by compassion, the liberation of mind by altruistic joy, the liberation of the mind by equanimity. Make it a vehicle and basis, carry it out, consolidate it, and properly undertake it. Thus should you train yourself. When this concentration has been developed and cultivated by you in this way, then you should develop this concentration with thought and examination. You should develop it without thought, but with examination only. You should develop it without thought and examination. You should develop it with rapture. You should develop it without rapture. You should develop it accompanied by comfort, and you should develop it accompanied by equanimity. So instead of teaching this bhikkhu now about the wisdom side and about letting go of the defilements and attaining arahantship, that bhikkhu is instructed to start over again from the very beginning and now go through the entire process again based on the other four Brahma Viharas, so the other three of the four Brahma Viharas. So first, he goes through the entire thing again based on compassion or karuna. So based on compassion, he develops an open mind, this liberation of the mind based on compassion. He develops that, he cultivates that, he really makes it very strong. He masters this entire technique. And then based on compassion, he again develops the four jhanas. So as the text here says, with the thought and examination and rapture and comfort and equanimity and so on. And then he starts over again and does the whole thing again with altruistic joy or mudita. So rejoicing in the good fortune of others. And again, develop that, really learn to open your heart based on that until there are no more barriers in the heart whatsoever. And then develop the four jhanas based on that. And then do the exact same thing with the fourth Brahma Vihara, upekkha or equanimity. So basically, that bhikkhu starts over and over again and develops these four jhanas based on different meditation methods. Now, in this particular case, based on the four Brahma Viharas. And once he has done that, he still doesn't develop the wisdom side, or he doesn't go on from the fourth jhana to make all those insights that lead to arahantship, but actually the Buddha teaches him to use yet another meditation method. And now the Buddha says, when, bhikkhu, this concentration has been developed and well developed by you in this way, then you should train yourself thus. I will dwell contemplating the body in the body, ardent, clearly comprehending, mindful, having removed longing and dejection in regard to the world. Thus should you train yourself. When this concentration has been developed and cultivated by you in this way, then you should develop the concentration with thought and examination, with examination only, without both thought and examination, with rapture, with comfort, and with equanimity, as before. And so now the Buddha teaches the monk to start over yet one more time, but this time he switches over to a completely different meditation method. This time he switches over to Satipatthana practice instead of Brahmavihara practice. So now he's developing his meditation based on the first of the four foundations of mindfulness, which is body contemplation. So he is contemplating the body, and again, as the Buddha says here, you contemplate the body and you're clearly comprehending, you're mindful, and you remove longing and dejection in regard to the world. So at this point, you have again overcome the five hindrances because you have removed longing and dejection. So longing obviously is when we are attracted to sensual objects or to other people. Dejection is sort of a repulsion or a feeling sort of repulsed by material objects or by people or literally by anything in the material world. So this is basically another shorthand reference for greed and for hatred, or for generally the five hindrances. So again, that bhikkhu overcomes the five hindrances and is now practicing Satipatthana. And this is interesting because Satipatthana obviously is a contemplation practice, and contemplation practices are more on the wisdom side of meditation practices, not necessarily on the Samadhi side of things. And what the Buddha here shows is that based on these wisdom practices, you can also develop the jhanas. So there isn't really a very, very clear hardcore distinction between wisdom practices and Samadhi practices. We can use wisdom practices also to develop Samadhi. It's just a little bit more difficult. And the reason why we can use wisdom practices to also develop Samadhi is that because as we use wisdom practices, as we do those contemplations, we understand how our mind works, we understand where our attachments are. Since we see our attachments, we can gradually, slowly let them go. As we let them go, our mind becomes more clear, becomes more pure. As our mind becomes more clear, Samadhi becomes much easier. So Samadhi basically develops as a byproduct of those wisdom practices. So it's a little bit more difficult and usually takes a little bit longer to get into Samadhi based on those contemplation practices, because Samadhi is just a byproduct and it's not the direct object of the meditation practice. So Samadhi develops a little bit slower, but eventually you can also develop Samadhi in this way. And especially in the case of this bhikkhu, because he has already practiced so much Samadhi and so much jhanas, and he has already mastery over the jhanas based on the other methods, probably it's not that difficult for him to develop Samadhi based on this method also. But now the bhikkhu slowly starts to incorporate some wisdom practices into his practice as well. And so again, he's doing this Satipatthana practice, the body contemplation. And then based on this body contemplation, he learns to go into jhanas as well, and he develops mastery over the jhanas. So as the Buddha says, you develop this and you well develop this. It's not just like you randomly do this and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. You really have a good grasp of the technique and you really have mastery over this. And whenever you want to do it, you can actually do it because your mind is so much used to the practice and so well developed in this practice. So, and once that bhikkhu has done that and has developed the four jhanas based on the body contemplation, I think you guessed it, the Buddha tells him to start over yet again. And so the Buddha says, when bhikkhu, this concentration has been developed and well developed by you in this way, then you should train yourself thus. I will dwell contemplating feelings in feelings, mind in mind, phenomena in phenomena, ardent, clearly comprehending, mindful, having removed longing and dejection in regard to the world. Thus should you train yourself. And then when this concentration has been developed and cultivated by you in this way, then you should develop this concentration with thought and examination. Without thought, but with examination only. Without thought and examination, with rapture, without rapture, with comfort, and with equanimity. So now the Buddha is talking or is teaching that monk to also do exactly the same thing, develop jhanas based on the other three of the four satipatthanas. So the feeling practice, contemplation of mind, and contemplation of phenomena. So again, to give him a very broad overview or very broad basis in all of the four satipatthanas, and then develop the jhanas based on that. So at this point now, the monk has started over 8 times. He has really cultivated the 4 Brahma-viharas to an extremely high extent. He has cultivated the 4 Satipatthanas to an extremely high extent, and he has mastery over the jhanas based on any of these 8 meditation objects. And at this point, the Buddha now says, when bhikkhu, this concentration has been developed and well developed by you in this way, then wherever you walk, you will walk at ease. Wherever you stand, you will stand at ease. Wherever you sit, you will sit at ease. Wherever you lie down, you will lie down at ease. So this is pretty strange phrasing, a pretty curious way of expressing things, because you would normally expect the Buddha to say, well, once you've developed and cultivated that, you can your mind is well prepared, you can make the breakthrough to arahantship. But the Buddha doesn't really say it in that way. He just says, well, whatever you do, you will live at ease. So your mind will be peaceful, your mind will be calm. And the Buddha is using here the 4 postures: walking, standing, sitting, lying down. So the Buddha is telling that monk, even in your daily life, like when you're not meditating, when you're walking, when you're sitting, when you're lying, like whatever you do in your ordinary daily life, your mind will be free and calm and liberated and at ease. So the Buddha is telling the monk, you will be an arahant, but he's not saying it directly. He's just telling the monk, like, what will be the consequences of him being liberated. And the consequences will be like, whatever he does in his life, whatever posture his body occupies, whatever activities he is engaged in, his mind will be calm and clear, and he will just be at ease. So he will be liberated, he will be an arahant, but the Buddha phrases it in a different way. So probably this was, again, inspired because this is a teaching to one specific monk, and maybe that monk was maybe it was more easier for that monk to understand the concept, or to maybe this was more inspiring to that monk. Maybe that monk was struggling the whole time and he was really striving to be at ease. Maybe that monk was sick, or his body was giving him a lot of trouble, or we really don't know, or his mind was very tormented. So maybe for that reason, this teaching was more appropriate for the monk than the standard version of talking about arahantship. So, and then we will see what happens now. And the sutta says, having received such an exhortation from the Blessed One, that bhikkhu rose from his seat, paid homage to the Blessed One, circumambulated him, keeping the right side towards him, and departed. Then, dwelling alone, withdrawn, heedful, ardent, and resolute, in no long time, that bhikkhu realized for himself, with direct knowledge in this very life, that unsurpassed consummation of the spiritual life, for the sake of which clansmen rightly go forth from the household life into homelessness. And having entered upon it, he dwelled in it. He directly knew, destroyed his birth, the spiritual life has been lived, what had to be done has been done, there's no more coming back to any state of being, and that bhikkhu became one of the arahants. So happy ending for the bhikkhu. He actually did what he announced that he would do. He does go into seclusion. He does practice accordingly. So clearly the motivation had been set in the beginning, and he was able to put that into practice. And he practiced according to the Buddha's instruction. We have to assume that he actually did do what the Buddha told him here, that he went through all of these things over and over again and developed all the jhanas based on all of these 8 methods, which must have been quite a task. Because normally it's difficult enough to develop the path based on one method, but to do it over and over again 8 times is quite a challenge. But it did work out for him in the end, and he did become an arahant. So it seems that this was really the right teaching for him in this case. And so now the question is, why does the Buddha teach him in this way? Why did the Buddha teach him to start over and over again 8 times? So it seems like it's kind of a little bit making it difficult for him. Or like, what could be the reason that somebody is taught in this way? And of course, we don't know, and it is all speculation, but I think there can be a number of different reasons why the Buddha would teach somebody in this way. And one of the reasons could be that maybe the Buddha saw that this individual has very good capabilities, for example, to become a teacher. And of course, if you become a teacher, then it is very good for you to be acquainted with a lot of different meditation methods. Because if you know, because your students will have different mental faculties also. And so there is no one size fits all in meditation practice, and everybody has a slightly different path and meditates in slightly different ways, and different methods will work differently for different people. So if a teacher is well acquainted with a broad range of methods, they can much better guide the students and much better select the proper or the appropriate meditation object for the students that they want to guide. So maybe the Buddha saw something like this in that bhikkhu, and for that reason, he really wanted him to have very broad knowledge over a range of meditation subjects, and for that reason, he gave him this teaching. The other option is, or the other idea that came to my mind why somebody might want to practice in this way is for people who are very, very strong samadhi types and whose wisdom faculty is comparatively really weak. So for such people need to develop a lot of samadhi so that their quite weak wisdom faculty is actually strong enough to see through all the delusion in the mind. And so the calmer the mind gets, the easier it is for wisdom to see through, to see through all the delusions, see through all the attachments, see through all the defilements, understand how the mind works, understand about dependent origination, and so on, and then be able to let go. And if your wisdom faculty is weak, you have to do this over and over and over again until finally it has become strong enough that you can actually properly let go. And so for somebody, if that monk had only practiced the first method and had arrived at the 4th jhana, but his wisdom faculty wasn't strong enough, then maybe the monk would have started to doubt, like he would have thought maybe, oh, I've already mastered the 4th jhana, still I'm not enlightened, what's happening? Maybe this method isn't working, maybe the Dhamma is wrong, maybe the Buddha was wrong, maybe I can't do it, and he might have given up, even though he had the potential for full arahantship. But if the Buddha tells him, well, you have to do this all over again 8 times, and the monk is prepared in his mind from the beginning that it will take a long time and he has to go through all these 8 times, so he develops very deep samadhi 8 times, so wisdom faculty has a lot more time to actually properly work before the monk makes the breakthrough. So the monk wouldn't get dejected if it doesn't work the first time, because the monk already knows, well, it will take a long time and I have to develop all these other methods too. So this is another possibility why somebody would need to develop samadhi so many times over. That's necessary for somebody whose wisdom faculty isn't quite as strong as most other people. So I think at this point we can finish the sutta discussion for today. And for now, if you have any questions or comments, please type them in the live chat. I have seen quite a few questions and comments pop up already. So I will have a look and see if I can answer them. So lots of people saying hello. Nice to see you all. Somebody's tuning in from Bangladesh. That's really nice. Very good to see you. Another person is also tuning in from Bangladesh. We have lots of people from Bangladesh, it seems. Very nice. Somebody's tuning in from Queensland. Very cool. And Buddharuchi says sometimes they think that most any practice accomplished to completion defines one as fully enlightened. And Buddharuchi says if we accomplish metta to its ultimate conclusion, we have all the rest as well. What do you think? And they also say on that note, my favorite example of this is equanimity. So in some ways, yes and no. I think a lot of different methods can be our doors to the deathless. And if we practice them to the ultimate conclusion, then we have a very good shot at arahantship. However, many of the practices lead us to really, really deep samadhi. What we need for the breakthrough is wisdom. So in many suttas, the Buddha has very clearly stated that taints are destroyed through seeing with wisdom. What we need, obviously, is the destruction of the taints, so the destruction of the defilements, which is what is liberating us, or which is what is binding us to samsara. And if we break them, then that is what is liberating us. So what we need is those deep samadhi stages or states together with right view or together with wisdom. So metta practice can lead us all the way to full enlightenment if we use it wisely, if we use that opening of the heart wisely, when all the barriers have fallen away, when we have actually a very open, very clear, very tranquil mind that is filled with goodwill and filled only with good qualities, then this is a very good basis for wisdom to make that final insight, to break through to arahantship and to dissolve all these attachments and all these bondages or all these taints that are still binding us to samsara. In and of itself, metta practice alone will not quite be enough if you don't have the wisdom or if you don't have the right view. So it doesn't really depend so much on the meditation technique itself. Metta can be a wonderful technique for that. Any of the other Brahma Viharas could be a technique. The Satipatthanas could be a technique. Various other forms of contemplations could be a technique if you're more of a Vipassana type and you like doing contemplations instead of samadhi practices. So there's so many techniques, but ultimately we need some measure of samadhi and we need some measure of wisdom to come together to make that breakthrough. So the technique itself might not fully be enough in all cases, but it's certainly a good basis. And that can be almost any kind of technique or any kind of practice. And then Dan says, Ayya, with the Satipatthana leading to jhana, do you think there is a development from diversity to simplicity? Maybe with the body practice, the body is stilled, its mental representation is simpler. So definitely there is a development from diversity to simplicity, absolutely. And I think that happens in any kind of technique, whether that is a Vipassana technique or a Samadhi technique. For example, if you use metta practice as an example, because I think most people will be familiar with that. In the beginning, it's very complicated. You constantly have to think, oh, may I be happy? May I be free from suffering? May I be well? And then you have to think about all these different categories of people and people I like and people I dislike and people that are neutral, or you might try to develop metta based on a teddy bear or a puppy or a dolphin or whatever you think that is cute. Or you might do it for people that are close to you, and then for people that are further away, and then for people in the entire world and people in the entire universe. And you constantly work with all these different categories, and your mind is really busy. So that is the beginning stages of any kind of technique. And so also for Satipatthana practices, for example, as you talk about the body practices, You do a lot of contemplations. You see the various parts of your body in various ways. So you do death contemplations or corpse contemplations or whatever kind of contemplations that you do that are based on the body. And your mind is very busy and is very active, and a lot is going on. And in the beginning, you'll need that because your mind is quite restless still, and it likes to wander off and think about random other stuff. So you have to keep your mind fairly busy with this wholesome meditation object. But as your mind quiets down and settles down, your meditation object should gradually become a lot simpler. So for example, with metta practice, you should gradually be able to just hold that feeling of metta without needing to constantly direct that to random other people or to yourself. And the feeling should just be there and then should gradually expand until it becomes limitless and the barriers in your mind all fall away. And the same with body-based practices. Eventually, you should be able to just be aware of your body without constantly thinking about it. Just holding the awareness inside your body, just feeling your body, and then letting any kind of other distraction fall away and letting that perception of your body become more and more unified, become more and more still. So as you said, the mental representation of that body becomes more and more simple. And so as you develop that gradually, obviously, the concentration of your mind becomes stronger because the mind becomes more unified on a single object. And so I think, yeah, I agree with you that there is definitely a development from diversity to simplicity with any kind of meditation practice, not just with the Satipatthana. And there are quite a few questions, so let's go a little bit faster. Dan also says, what inspired me to choose this sutta? I'm not actually all that sure. I think it's a really interesting sutta because this is one of the instances where we can very clearly see how Vipassana-based practices, such as contemplation practices, lead to Samadhi also, and not just the other way around. So very often, especially in modern times, there are a lot of teachers that say you need to develop Samadhi first. And then once you have jhanas, then you do wisdom-based practices. And there are suttas that describe the path in that way, so that isn't wrong. But for some people, the path works the other way around because some people are people that are natural Vipassana types and some people are natural Samadhi types. And so it's good that we know that there are different pathways so that people for whom the path works in a different way don't feel left out or don't feel that there's something wrong with them, and that they also know that their path is a valid path, so that they don't constantly have doubt, like whether they're doing the right thing. And I think it's very important to acknowledge that the progress is very individual and that there are many angles from which you can come to the path. And many paths are valid. And it's very important to understand that there's this whole range of experiences that how people can make progress. And then the other thing that I thought is really interesting is that here the Buddha again gives a very individual teaching to a very individual monk, and for this monk he really tells him to practice all of these various different methods. So for most people, the instruction is right to find one method that works for them and then stick with that method and go deeper with that method. But in this particular case, it seems that there was a person for whom the Buddha said, no, you develop one method and then you develop another one and then you develop another one. So again, the path is very individual. And I thought this was really a very unusual sutta, and I think a very interesting sutta. That is why I picked it. And then Alexis says, how can we overcome the 5 hindrances? So, well, that is a big question, and it's not really addressed here in the sutta. So in order to really talk about this, we should pick another sutta and have a whole session dedicated about it. But yeah, basically we overcome the 5 hindrances with our meditation object. So we need to find a meditation object that is skillful, and then keep on practicing and not being dejected if it doesn't work, and if it takes a lot of effort and if it takes a long time. So when the mind wanders off to one of the hindrances, just come back to the meditation object and keep on trying again and again. And then over time, if you notice that there is a specific hindrance that bothers you the most, then you can use specific techniques that counter that specific hindrance. So just in brief, if your hindrance, for example, is anger, then metta practice will be a direct countermeasure to let go of anger. If your main hindrance is restlessness, then calming meditations such as mindfulness of breathing will be a good measure. If you have a lot of greed in your mind, then practices such as contentment, renunciation, and also giving and things like that will be very good. If your main hindrance is sleepiness, then energizing forms of meditation will be good, such as, for example, walking meditation. If your main hindrance is doubt, then strengthening your faith in Buddha, Dhamma, and Sangha will be good through various practices, for example, through studying more, through doing chanting, through whatever sort of increases your faith or your confidence in Buddha, Dhamma, Sangha. So just very briefly, these are like countermeasures for specific hindrances, depending on which one kind of troubles you the most. Then Dan says, I was thinking of changing to metta soon, inspired by Bhante Sujato and his talks on Ajahn Mahachachai. So yes, Bhante Sujato has has a lot of experience with metta practice. He is one of, I think, the most famous teachers that really teach metta in a lot of detail. Also, you will find online retreats, like recordings of retreats led by him that will just focus on metta practice. So 10-day retreats where everything is just on like building up your metta practice, and every day there are deeper instructions on how to practice. So there's a lot of material online. So I think, yeah, Bhante Sujato is a very good source if you want to practice metta. Okay, so Buddha Ruchi is very happy, and I'm very glad that it was helpful. And then there's Anthony, and he says, sometimes in the discourses, arahants are described as going beyond doubt. I know doubt is considered to be one of Mara's armies. Can going beyond doubt about the Dhamma be considered escaping Mara? So usually arahants are not described as going beyond doubts. Usually it's the stream enterers that go beyond doubt. So doubt is one of the fetters or one of the hindrances that are cut off at stream entry. And stream entry is what can be considered going beyond doubt. But at stream entry, you haven't escaped Mara yet. So you escape Mara only at arahantship, or at the most at non-return, but not yet at stream entry. So when you have gone beyond doubt, what you have done is you are confirmed in the Dhamma, and because you are a stream enterer, it is certain that you will eventually attain arahantship. So in that way, you have the assurance that in the future you will escape Mara, but you haven't escaped Mara at that point yet. So for a stream enterer, it is said they have 7 lives left at most. So they have this assurance eventually they will go beyond Mara's realm and attain full liberation. But for the time being, they are still stuck in Mara's realm, because even though they have gone beyond doubt, they have some defilements left in their mind. So they still have some kind of greed, some kind of anger, and so on. And of course, greed and anger and hatred and fear and all these are emotions that are sort of within Mara's realm or under Mara's sort of sway or control. So in some way, Mara still has some kind of influence over even stream enterers, even though they have gone beyond doubt already. Then somebody says, Mangekyo says, how important is faith? And faith is quite important. Some people don't like the word faith, so you can call it confidence or whatever word suits you best. We're talking about the Pali word Sutta. And of course, it is important that you have faith in the practice, the Buddha, and also in your own abilities that you can actually practice, because faith obviously is the counterpart to doubt. So if you have a lot of doubt in your mind, if you're constantly second guessing what you're doing, you can't really put all your energy behind your practice. Like if you sit down for meditation, then you wonder, am I doing the right thing? Am I using the right method? Was the Buddha right? Or maybe the Buddha was delusional and this teaching isn't working. Or maybe the Dhamma is wrong. Maybe the Sutta is wrong. Or maybe I'm wrong. Maybe other people can practice and other people can become arahants, but I can't. So you're constantly undermining yourself and you're constantly undermining your own practice. So obviously it's not going to go anywhere. And obviously you're not going to make the progress that you could make if you had faith. And if you were like totally confident that you can do it and that this is true and you give all your energy into it. And then of course your heart opens up and you can make a lot of progress. Whereas if you have the doubt, your heart closes and your mind is very agitated and you just don't really make the progress that you could otherwise make. And one last question by Dan, and he says, really interesting to hear your talk on diversity to simplicity in metta. As this sutta makes me feel a bit better about self-doubts I had about switching around a bit in the past. Yeah, I think switching around is fine, especially in the beginning, because in the beginning, like, you have to find a technique that really suits you. And some people hear this teaching of stick with one technique and never switch. So they just use the first technique that they come in contact with. And for many people, that is not a suitable technique. And they just stick with a technique and they don't have any joy in the practice and the practice isn't going anywhere. And after 20 years, they're just so frustrated and they just throw away their entire practice. And they say, I haven't gotten anywhere and it just doesn't work and this path is stupid and it's just useless. And the problem was that the technique never worked for them. But if they had used another technique, they might have not wasted the last 20 years and they might have made a lot of progress. So if people are somewhat dissatisfied with their practice, and if after practicing a certain technique for a few weeks or a few months, they still don't seem to make any progress and it still seems to be super, super difficult and they still can't find any joy in their practice, then probably that technique isn't working and then you should try out something else. And it's always good if you can talk to a teacher personally, face-to-face, and get some input. And if that teacher gets to know you a little bit, understands your character a little bit, they can advise you what kind of meditation methods might be suitable for somebody with your particular mental setup, with your particular disposition, with your particular defilements that you struggle with, or the strong points that you have. And they can advise you and they can help you find a suitable technique. And for that reason, having a teacher is really valuable. Because sometimes it's really difficult, especially for beginners, to really sort of properly assess themselves. And because when you have a lot of delusions in your mind, it's really difficult to sort of know how to get started and to know what kind of technique is the right one. But teachers have seen a lot of students already and they have a lot of experience with various different people. So for them, it's usually quite easy to see, you are a greed type, you're a hate type, you're a delusion type, you are maybe a Samadhi type or a Vipassana type, or for somebody with your kind of mental setup, this might be a good thing to try, or that might be a good thing to try. And so teachers can really help you to find a good method. And so in the beginning, I think it's okay to switch around a little bit, but yeah, don't spend the next 20 years just switching randomly. At some point, you need to settle down on one technique, but it's okay to explore different things from time to time. So I think that was the last question for today. So I hope you enjoyed this sutta. And we will finish for today with 3 sadhus. Feel free to join if you like. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. So have a good week, and I will see you all next Tuesday.